Değerli konuklar, iklim değişikliği geleceğin tarım politikalarına da yön veriyor malumunuz. İklim değişikliğini tek başına düşünmek, bu politikaları geliştirmek için pek de yeterli değil. İşte bu noktada bilim insanlarının çalışmaları son derece kıymetli. Bugün çok değerli bir bilim insanı bizimle birlikte. Kendisi Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde yaptığı çalışmalarla adından söz ettiren bir bilim insanı. İklim değişikliğinin tarım, bitki fizyolojisi ve su kaynaklarına etkisi, sulama sistemlerinin dizaynı, toprak fiziği programları, bitki stresi araştırmaları, bu bilimsel araştırmaların halka transferinin sağlanması, gelecek nesillerin eğitilmeleri konusunda çalışmalar yapıyor ve daha birçok çalışması da var. Bugün bizi katılımlarıyla onurlandıran Nebraska Üniversitesi öğretim görevlisi Profesör Doktor Suat Irmak, iklim değişikliğinin su kaynakları ve tarımsal verimlilik üzerindeki olumsuz etkilerini azaltacak tarımsal politikalar geliştirmek konusunda bir sunum yapacak. Profesör Doktor Sayın Suat Irmak'ı alkışlarınızla sahneye davet ediyorum.
Merhabalar. Canan Hanım, çok teşekkür ederim bu introduction için. Öncelikle Samet Bey'e ve kuruluşuna bu ortamı sağladığı için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Ben bilimi İngilizce öğrendiğim için Türkçe bunu anlatmak benim için çok zor olacağından İngilizce anlatmaya çalışacağım. Eğer izin verirseniz. Biraz bekleyeyim mi yoksa başlayayım mı?
Bence başlayabiliriz.
Okay, sounds good. So as a Turkish and American citizen, or Turkish American, I'm proud to be here to share our knowledge and research and scientific data information with you. And I'm proud to represent University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So today I'm gonna try to communicate to you some of our ongoing studies and research programs, education programs related to climate change and or changing climate variables and their impacts on different components. Agriculture has been profoundly important for human civilization. In fact, our ancestors are the first farmers in our region, by Sumerians in Mesopotamia, which includes southeastern portion of Anatolia, of our country, and of course Iraq. So the first agricultural initiatives have started in this region, including irrigated agriculture. So 8,000, 10,000 years ago, our ancestors were initiating agricultural practices. And then by 5,000 BC, Egyptians were the pioneer to fine-tune some of the agricultural practices, including diverting water from the Nile River to irrigate their fields. So this is really important. And then, of course, we know Romans perfected irrigation delivery systems by constructing state-of-the-art canals and other irrigation structures. Irrigation has been playing a crucial role in meeting the increasingly food, fiber, and fuel demand of increasingly growing population. So right now, in the global scale, 40% of the world's total food production comes from 20% of irrigated arable land. So we are irrigating only about 40% of the arable land, and or 20%, and 40% of the total food production comes from that land area. So irrigation plays a crucial role in meeting this global food, fiber, fuel demand. Turkey has a robust agricultural industry. It's not perfect by any means, but you can see the numbers, and I have to say that Turkey has very limited statistical data that are available to scientists and researchers, but using this limited data set or statistics, I was able to gather some critical information to be able to set the ground or background information for this presentation. So agriculture is a great industry that houses about 20% of the population, country's population, that has about $52 billion revenue to the state economy. So it does play a critical role in Turkish economy. If you look at the data, if you look at the total arable land in the country, there is a declining trend over time. You can see right now about 21 million hectares of land is arable in the country. That is a little lower than what it was about 10 years ago. So there is a decline in agricultural land that we cultivate for different cropping systems. I'm not going to get into the reasons for that decline. There are different reasons, but you are all experts, and you can imagine what inputs go into cultivating the land and what difficulties exist. So you can make your own judgment on that. My research team members and I put those figures and graphs together, and I'm pretty sure that these are the data sets and figures, graphs that you are going to see that were established for the first time for our country. So this knowledge or data presentation in this format has not been available. So this map shows the total cropped or cultivated land area in Turkey, and you can see there is a good distribution. There is a good distribution in the, I'm not sure if you can see the pointer, but there is a good distribution overall in the entire country. So almost every spot, every region in the country is critically important for producing agricultural production. So this is latest statistics in terms of irrigated land area globally, and it's not surprising that China and India are leading the total land that are under irrigation. In the US, there is about 25 million hectares of irrigated land. If I can figure out how to use this. Do I use the same button to go back and forth, or this is confusing? Thank you. So in the world, you can see the total irrigated land area is about 326 million hectare, and India, China are leading the way. In the United States, that's about 24 million hectares. In Turkey, there is about 5.2, 5.3 million hectares of irrigated land. Just to give you a perspective, in Nebraska alone, there is about 3.6 million hectares of irrigated land. So 5.2 million hectares of land for the entire country in Turkey may or may not be enough given the challenges that we are facing today and we might face in the near future. So irrigation development in the country has to be looked at very, very carefully. And this is the irrigated land area map for the country. You can see it's distributed throughout the country, but there is a concentration in the Mediterranean region. It's a very dry area, of course, in the south, and some in the northwest part of the country. So So since today's topic has climate, agriculture, and water resources, and there are some fundamental knowledge that we know that climate impacts pretty much everything on the planet. So climate variables are changing, and in some cases they are changing very fast. Air temperatures are increasing, CO2 concentration is increasing, and that is having tremendous impact on crop response to environmental variables. It is having impact on water resources, it is having impact on animal agriculture, it is having impact on human health, and you can see there are many other important aspects that climate interacts with on the soil or earth surface. In terms of hydrologic cycles, climate change impacts hydrologic balances, including deep percolation, water availability, surface runoff, and irrigation water availability, and other practices. It also has impact on land cover, land use, forestry, and also wildfires in terms of occurrence frequency for wildfires, which is very common, becoming very common natural hazard in the United States and other places. So these are critical topics for human beings, for us, and for environment, and we need to pay attention to those. So some people may argue that temperature increase is small, but we have to keep in mind that even a small change in air temperature can have a tremendous impact on biological systems. Humankind may not be able to detect that change, but biological systems such as plants, especially plant physiology, animal health, can be impacted tremendously by small change in air temperature. Also, when air temperature increases, vapor pressure deficit increases, which is the atmospheric demand for evaporation from the soil surface. So that is critical. Radiation has been increasing in many parts of the world that we have to pay attention to. And these are some published scientific data throughout the world. Increase in air temperature has been documented very carefully through scientific research. Overall, in the atmosphere, especially at the lower level of the atmosphere, there is about 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in air temperature, which is huge. For us, for human, this may not be a big number, but as I said, for other species, plant and animal species, this is a very, very big number, big increase that can fundamentally change some of the biological functions of the system. So based on our studies, we observed up to 3.8 degrees Celsius increase in some parts of the world, and especially in maximum air temperature and minimum air temperature, which I'm going to talk about more in detail in the next few slides. One other important finding that is being cited in the literature extensively is the impact How do I go back with this? Can you tell me? There is no back button on this one, so. Okay, so another important study or research is this one. Based on our extensive study that we conducted in 900 plus counties in the United States, so that encompasses about 30–40% of the whole United States, and we found that growing season for growing crops has increased by 17 days. So this is really important, this is really critical. Some people argue if you are going to have longer season due to increase in air temperature, solar radiation, vapor pressure deficit, that is great because then you can grow longer season cropping species, longer season corn, longer season soybean, longer season winter wheat. But we have to be careful because longer season cropping systems utilize more input, more resources, more water, more evapotranspiration, more disease potential, more nitrogen or fertilizer input. So these have to be looked at very carefully. So why growing season or growing season length is getting longer? It's because due to temperature increase and radiation increase, our first frost in spring is becoming earlier. First frost in spring is becoming earlier, and late frost in fall is becoming later. So that means growing season is getting longer. So this is really critical information that we really have to pay attention to. So CO2 has been increasing significantly, CO2 level in the lower and upper atmosphere. So this chart is from measured CO2 level in Hawaii. I have not been able to find any data for Turkey, but this is also critical. I think there is no reason why we cannot establish this kind of data collection platforms for this country. So this is critical for many different agricultural practices. When CO2 level increases in the atmosphere, then you are going to subject the biological systems, plants, animals, and other soil microbiome to different levels of CO2, different levels of oxygen, and that can have tremendous impact on their productivity, their functions. So we need to start monitoring CO2 levels in our country here in Turkey. So this slide is very critical. Now we hear so many discussions, so many ideas, so many data on a global scale that climate change is happening and temperatures are increasing, solar radiation is increasing on a global scale, and I presented some data to you, up to 3.8 degrees Celsius increase. Now these are great. These are really useful, impactful data and scientific discoveries. However, there is a locality of changing climate variables' impact on agriculture and water resources. Locality, I mean, what is happening in Antarctica or Arctic or United States or China, India, doesn't necessarily mean that in our country, in Turkey, we have similar or same changes. So we must study, quantify those changes for our local, regional conditions so that we can have better understanding and we can develop better strategies to deal with this changing climate variables impact on agricultural and natural resources. So the message is global change or global data may or may not be very useful to us when we get to the local or regional scale, when you try to understand what is happening to agriculture, how climate interacts with agriculture and natural resources, especially for water resources, we have to get down to what is happening at the local scale. So, as I mentioned, these graphs, maps, are being put together by my research team, myself, for the last 3 or 4 months. So these kind of data sets have not been available, as far as I know, and I may be wrong. But this is a spatial distribution of different climatic variables. These are 60-year average values. Goes back to 1960s, early 1970s. But these are critical information and data to be able to assess what is happening in different parts of the country. So, change in air temperature, change in vapor pressure deficit, change in solar radiation doesn't have the same impact in different parts of the country. So this is really important. So when you establish the change or total increase in air temperature, it doesn't happen the same way everywhere in the country. So there is a spatial attribute, spatial characteristics of the change in climate variables. So this is really critical. We have to get down to smaller, finer scale resolution to be able to understand what is happening to maximum air temperature on the left side, what is happening to minimum air temperature, and then we can understand how this might interact with different cropping systems on the ground. So we looked at many different variables, because I wanted to make a little bit contribution to better understanding of climate and agricultural interactions in our country, in Turkey. So we spent about 4 months to look at the data, analyze them, and today is the first platform that I'm happy to present those data and share them with you. So we looked at maximum air temperature, minimum air temperature, average air temperature. We looked at precipitation, rainfall, total precipitation. This is solar radiation. This is incoming short-wave radiation. It is not the amount of radiation that the crops utilize for photosynthesis or transpiration or other physiological activities, but it's the shortcoming or incoming short-wave radiation, short-wave. We looked at net radiation. Net radiation is the amount of energy or sunlight that is used by the plant species to transfer light energy into photosynthesis and transpiration that produces yield, sugar, carbohydrates, and other products. And you can see there is a significant spatial variability in the entire country in each variable. There is no uniform or uniformity of any variables distribution in the country. There are many climate variables. Relative humidity. We looked at wind speed. We looked at actual vapor pressure, the map on the lower left side. We looked at vapor pressure deficit. This is very critical, the one on the right bottom. Vapor pressure deficit, I explained that a little bit, but if you allow me to elaborate a little bit more. Vapor pressure deficit essentially indicates how dry the lower atmosphere is getting. In other words, the vapor requirement of the atmosphere from the Earth surface. As you all know, when that happens, there's a big potential difference between the Earth's surface and the atmosphere. So if the atmosphere is getting drier, then atmosphere has to get that moisture from the surface, right? Because there's no other source. So, but in that case, atmosphere will always win. It's always going to win. It's always going to get the moisture from the surface. It can be water body, it can be soil surface, soil moisture, it can be transpiration. So therefore, when vapor pressure deficit increases, then your water evaporation from plant surfaces, from soil surface, from water bodies is going to increase to meet that atmospheric water demand. So all variables are critical, but this vapor pressure deficit is critical. And I'm gonna share with you some graphs to show how those variables have been changing on a temporal scale in Turkey, so then we can have better understanding as to what are the potential impacts of those to agriculture, water resources, irrigation development, and so on. Another step that we took is to quantify evapotranspiration rates for the whole country. So we solved the Penman-Monteith, which is a standardized way of quantifying evapotranspiration. It is well established by the scientific community. In fact, I was the proud chair and vice chair and secretary of the committee, national committee, who developed that standardized evapotranspiration equation. So we solved that equation for probably 500 plus locations in Turkey and quantified evapotranspiration rates over time, and I'm gonna share with you the temporal. This is a spatial map. So in the country, there is an overall increase in evapotranspiration since 1960s, late 1950s, and this is very, very important to understand. So we did not only quantify how much ET, evapotranspiration ET, is increasing, but also where, in which part of the country, by how much. So this is really important data set, and I will be happy to share with our scientists in the country and state and federal agencies. So one other thing that we did was we divided the data set into annual from January 1st until December 31st, and also growing season. And we assumed that growing season starts from March and ends in October, November. I do understand there are some cropping systems in the country. Winter wheat is an example, and there are many other cropping systems that do not fall into that growing season length or growing season, March through October or November. But in about 4 months, it's impossible to study all growing season lengths for all cropping systems. So I'm going to present some data on the annual changes on climate variables and also growing season-based changes that may have more relevance to agricultural productivity and water resources. Regardless of looking at annual scale or growing season scale, most of the climate variables have increasing trends. In some cases, precipitation has been increasing as well. But we are going to see if this is enough or not when we get into precipitation versus evapotranspiration relationships. So average temperature has been increasing in the most of the country, and in some cases significant increases. Radiation has been increasing. Of course, if radiation, short wave radiation is increasing, then net radiation has to increase. So there is an increase in net radiation as well. Relative humidity, as you might expect, if temperature is increasing, radiation is increasing, then what happens to relative humidity? It has to decrease. So there is a significant decreasing trend in relative humidity. So air is getting drier overall in the country. Wind speed does not have much change overall in the country, but if you go to specific areas in Çukurova, Adana, which is my hometown, so I provided some examples for my hometown, then there are some changes in wind speed as well. And again, evapotranspiration has been increasing on an annual scale. So there was a unique data set on different variables, not many variables, but some limited variables, such as maximum air temperature, minimum air temperature, and precipitation. This is one example. We took data set from 1900 all the way to current day, and we looked at about 120 years of data. You can see the annual precipitation. This is annual, January 1st, December 31st. In the entire country, there is a slight increasing trend. Overall, it is not statistically significant, so there is no change essentially, but there is only 4 millimeter increase in the precipitation on a countrywide average basis from 1900 to 2017, which is not much, of course. But as I mentioned, locality is critical. If you go to individual places in the country, such as Adana, we went back to the data, same data set for Adana for precipitation, and you can see from 1900 until 2017, there is a significant decline in precipitation. So while overall the country does not have much change in precipitation, if you go to individual regions, areas that have agriculturally importance in certain areas, then there are some significant changes. So that is critical. That's a critical message that I want to relate to you, that we cannot look at global scale or country-wide scale. We have to go back to individual finer scales to be able to quantify those changes and better interpret, and so that we can develop some good programs to see how we can deal with those issues due to climate change. So overall, from 1900 to 2017, there is about 30 millimeter decline in precipitation. So this is more than 1 inch. It's a lot of water, especially in water-limited area, such as Mediterranean climate, where it doesn't rain anything, any drop essentially from April, May until October. 28 millimeter of water is a big number. So far I shared the spatial trends in the entire country. So now I want to get to more temporal scale. So over time, what is happening to different climate variables. You can see on the left upper side, this is maximum air temperature, and you can see very easily there is a significant increase in country scale and also in my hometown, in Adana, in Çukurova, without any doubt. Especially minimum temperature minimum temperature has been increasing with a larger rate than the maximum temperature. And of course, average temperature has been increasing because both of them are increasing. So this is really important. Minimum temperature is critical. Minimum temperature occurs usually at nighttime, right? Early morning hours, nighttime, that's where daily minimum temperature occurs. Well, this is critical for crop productivity because during daytime, crops absorb solar energy, light, air temperature, water, nutrients, and then they work through photosynthesis, transpiration. They build up carbohydrates, sugar, and then turn that into yield, of course. So transpiration, photosynthesis is critical for yield production. So what happens at nighttime? Many scientists ignore. They assume there is nothing happening at nighttime, but that's totally wrong. At night times, plants are actually like us. So they go to sleep, but they don't die. They still have to maintain some of their fundamental biological functions, right? So they still have to respiration has to take place. When we go sleep, we still take breath and we still continue or maintain some of our functions. So plants are the same. So when they do that, they need energy. For respiration to take place, plants need energy. Well, there is no sunlight at night. So where do they get that energy from? Air temperature. Which air temperature? Minimum air temperature. So, as we also know, transpiration and respiration are opposite processes. One builds yield, one consumes yield, because at nighttime plants consume some of the dry matter yield that it worked hard to produce during the daytime. It uses a portion of that at nighttime to continue to maintain some of its biological functions. And it uses minimum temperature for that. So if minimum temperature increases, that means more respiration, which is opposite of transpiration, which is yield consumer. Then more minimum air temperature, less yield, more respiration. So this is really critical. I haven't seen any article from the entire country, from our scientific community in Turkey. Nobody talks about this. I don't know why, but we need to take a look at that. We need to talk about this. And you can argue with me that, so what can be done? Well, there are things that can be done. Scientific innovation, there are things that are being done in other parts of the world, and we can talk about those things too. But I haven't seen any discussion, any data, or any research on that significant topic. I don't want to spend too much time on those trends, but the overall message is air temperature is increasing, both maximum air temperature, which has significant implication on crop stress, water evaporation, minimum temperature, which has significant implication on respiration, yield, consumer. So we might see some declines in yields for some crop species, not all, but some. Net radiation has been increasing, incoming short wave, vapor pressure deficit. Look at the trend. These are very, very significant slopes of those lines. So there are significant increases. At the end of the day, evapotranspiration has been increasing pretty much for the whole country. And if you go to individual locations, regions, that there are significant, more significant increases. For example, if you look at the country average value, this is the increase in evapotranspiration for the whole country. Look at the slope of the regression line for Adana. So evapotranspiration has been increasing with a larger rate in Adana than the country average. So I apologize for this table if it's too small for you to read, but I promise you, as far as I know, these are the first data sets that were put together for Turkey. It was not an easy task, but since I'm Turkish American, I'm proud to work on this and share with all of you. Now, several critical messages in this table. So this is the climate variable, all the climate variables that we talked about. I wanted to compare the country and Adana for each variable. And I did this for annual time scale and for growing season time scale for each variable. So overall, without spending too much time on this table, if you look at pretty much all climate variables, with the potential exception of one or two, there have been significant increases, and the increases are much greater in Adana than for the country. So again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but then we continued for other variables: wind speed, vapor pressure, actual vapor pressure deficit, and evapotranspiration. So I think I failed to mention that, yeah, let me mention this. Could you please help me to go back a couple slides? A keyboard here will be super. One more, and one more. Thank you. So I think we need to talk about this. Just let me, if I can take a couple more minutes. Look at precipitation. You can see let's take, for example, Adana. Precipitation for growing season, right here. Let's see, this one. So precipitation from 1900 to 2017, there has been some increase, 60 plus millimeter, 63, 64 millimeter? Am I looking at the right number? No, wrong. 78 millimeter, right? So precipitation has increased by 78 millimeters. So you can argue that's great, and that is great. But if you look at the next slide, evapotranspiration, let me find the right number. Adana growing season has increased by almost 120 millimeter. So there is a net loss. Precipitation has increased by a certain amount, say X, but evapotranspiration has increased by X plus. So water resources must be declining, evaporation rate must be increasing. So that is a critical analysis that we need to look at. We need to pay attention to that. So if we keep doing this, well, not us, but if climate keeps doing this, more evaporation, and with a lesser amount of precipitation addition to the system, then over time, it's gonna be drier and drier and drier and drier. So challenges are gonna get probably bigger and bigger to deal with. So this is just one example for Adana, but if you look at other agriculturally important areas in middle Anatolia, in Konya, Kayseri, if you look at east, if you look at southeast, southwest, northeast, the trend is the same. Lesser amount of precipitation and more evapotranspiration, and things are getting drier. So this is a very important message. So you can argue that as scientists, so you quantify all those, and you know, I had to send a message to my colleagues, other professors, other scientists. We need to look at this kind of analysis more and more and more. Otherwise, how can we better understand what is happening to climate, and how can we quantify the interactions between climate variables and agricultural productivity and water resources and crop physiology and so on and so forth. So we have to start doing those analyses. Another point that you can argue about, so what can we do? What can we do? What can be done? There are a lot of things that are being done in other countries. So I'm going to provide some examples from other countries, and specifically from my research program, on some technologies, some innovations, some practices, strategies that we developed and are being adopted by farmers, crop consultants, state and federal agency personnel to counter negative impacts of climate change on water resources, agriculture, productivity, and so on. So a couple important messages in this slide. So there is a debate, as you know. Some people argue it is not man-made. Some people argue it is man-made climate. As scientists, I don't really care. I don't really care who is responsible for those changes. the thing is that changes are happening. So whether it's man-made or natural occurrence, as a scientist, I don't care. I look at the trends. I look at the magnitudes of those changes. That's what I'm interested in. I leave those discussions to politicians, to other people. I focus on the scientific components of those changes. So, changing climate variables and potential implications to productivity has to be communicated through a well-organized and coordinated educational programs. As I mentioned, resolution, the final resolution has to be done. We have to establish more weather stations, and there are some in Turkey, but they are not nearly enough. And in fact, when I was an undergrad student at Çukurova University, I did work on maintaining some of those weather stations. Mostly manual data collection. We need to do much better than that. We need to incorporate technology, some good quality science research-based technologies to monitor climate variables in finer resolution in many parts of the country. And I'm not gonna spend too much time, but so as I mentioned, there are some effective, efficient agricultural practices, technologies, innovations that can be adopted to deal with some of the negative impacts of changing climate variables on agricultural productivity. So let me start sharing with you some pictures on what we have been doing and what our citizens in Nebraska and other states are adopting. Now, as you all know very well, I'm sure, the dominant irrigation system or method globally is surface irrigation, right? Furrow irrigation, basin irrigation, border irrigation, so these are all gravity irrigation systems. So there are other technologies that you guys are also aware, that center pivot technology that has less evaporative losses than surface irrigation. So this can be a net gain in terms of water application efficiency. So this can be looked at. And I was instrumental to initiate some center pivots incorporation to Turkey from Valmont, from TNL, from other companies, because there are 4 major center pivot companies in the world, and 4 of them are in Nebraska, and I have very good relationships with all of them. So this technology can be looked at by our policy leaders and decision makers, our political leaders who are making those decisions. This technology can be helpful to counter some of the negative impacts of changing or that evaporation component. This is another system that I have in my research team. This is a research program. This is a variable rate irrigation and fertilizer management system. So you can apply the water and nutrients to a specific location. You can divide the field into 10 meter by 10 meter squares or grids, and you can apply what is needed to each grid, 10 meter by 10 meter. You can do this for water and fertilizer as well. We call this variable rate irrigation, variable rate fertigation technology. There are GPS guided technologies. Now the technology is critical because it takes the human error out of the component. And I argue this for years. When we humans make decisions on certain things, we are prone to make errors, right? Because there's a judgment call in decision making. But if you have good quality, robust technology that comes from research-based, scientific-based, then we are kind of reducing or perhaps eliminating this error in decision making when humans are involved. I hope you agree with me on that. So if you do good quality research, scientifically based research, collect data, interpret very well, and then develop a technology, that technology should reduce the error that may come from human component. We have extensive research on surface irrigation. We have about 1 million hectares of surface irrigated land in Nebraska. By the way, Nebraska is #1 state in the United States in terms of irrigated land area. 3.6 million hectare is irrigated. So there is automation in surface irrigation. I don't see much of that in Turkey. And I spent a lot of time in fields in Turkey as well in my younger ages. I worked as an intern engineer at a GAP project, Southeastern Anatolia project, when they were building those canals and other infrastructures. I designed some of those canals, return canals especially, I spend a lot of time in Çukurova, in Antalya, in research fields. So I am aware, and I've been following the literature and development. So I am not totally foreign to Turkey and our developmental functions in certain areas, especially irrigation engineering and crop physiology and productivity. So there are great technologies that exist, surge irrigation, gated pipe technology, that we can automate surface irrigation technologies to reduce consumption of water for surface irrigation. But I don't see anything done in that front in this country, unfortunately. Another technology that I must introduce to you is, I'm sure most of you are aware, the subsurface drip irrigation, SDI, subsurface drip. I introduced that technology to Nebraska about 14 years ago. I worked on that in Florida when I was doing my PhD at the University of Florida. So this is a great technology, different than sprinkler irrigation and gravity irrigation, where crops are irrigated from top to bottom. In this technology, crops are irrigated from bottom up. So all components are underground, so we irrigate and fertigate the crop from bottom up. These are some pictures from my research program where, or when we were installing some of the SDI systems in my research fields. You install the tape every other row, or drip tape every other row between the two crops. Go through those pictures very fast. So the tractor on the left side, which we call shank, it injects the tape underground at 35, 40 centimeter deep. And that depth can be a function of plant that we are growing, the soil type, the climatic conditions, water availability, and many other factors. And those things have to be determined by my colleagues for different soil types exist in the country. So that a lot of work go into determining those parameters. So we inject the tape on the left side, and then with a tractor that has duals, we pack the soil surface. As a professor, I spent a lot of time in the field doing things myself, with my technicians, with my students. To me, as professors, we need to spend some time in the field to learn the real world and understand how things interact, so that we can teach our younger generation more effectively. So I spent a lot of time in the field as an educator. So I was personally involved in designing and installing the system. So this is subsurface drip. These are the main lines. And then you connect individual tapes to the main lines. This is the final product on the left side. All the tapes are connected to the main line. These are the flushing valves. So you need to flush the system once or twice a year to keep all the debris and sediments from the system. This is another system that I designed and we installed with my team. This is one of a kind system in the world. We are very proud of that system. I had probably 800 plus scientists from all over the world, including from Turkey, to come and see that system. It is really unique, but it is a great model to other scientists. So you put all the system components underground and then backfill. These are injection pumps. We can inject nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, any other chemical underground. We spoon feed the crops right at the crop root zone with water and nutrients. With this system, the topsoil remains dry at all times during the season. So the topsoil is dry. That means we reduce or eliminate the evaporation losses, which is critical. So all the water we apply, which is much less than pivot or surface irrigation systems, all the water we apply goes to transpiration. So there is no evaporation losses from the system, which is important because water evaporation is an unbeneficial use of water, right? We agree on that. It doesn't contribute to crop production. It doesn't contribute to anything. So if you can reduce that amount of water that evaporates from the system, then you can gain a lot. This is this filter. I'm just sharing with you some of the technologies that exist in other parts of the world so we can all enhance our understanding, our information. This is a control unit. This is a final product. It is 100% automated system. I can run this system from my cell phone, from my laptop, even here now. You can apply different amounts of water to different parts of the field, and you can apply nutrients. We can even apply insecticides. fungicide, and other chemicals. So it is really state-of-the-art system, and it was replicated in many other places: Texas, Arizona, California, Colorado, Iowa, and other places. How am I doing in time? Okay. So this is another system that we designed and installed. These are technologies that I said that can reduce the evaporation losses. This is another unique system with many other plots, but in this case you can do so many different things. You can variably irrigate and fertigate without any evaporation losses. Automation has to be part of the system or part of the equation. So this is, so far, subsurface drip has been everything underground. This is precision mobile irrigation system that we bring everything above ground. It's not center pivot, but you attach all the system components, tapes, drip irrigation tapes to the center pivot, and then you irrigate the field with a surface drip fashion to eliminate evaporation losses. It's a brand new technology. In our research program, we monitor crop or canopy temperature extensively to monitor crop water stress and how crop responds to different amount of temperature, radiation, and water stress. These are some of the automated canopy temperature sensors. There are technologies that exist. For example, tillage systems, soil practices that can have tremendous impact on productivity. With less inputs, you can increase productivity. Cultivation is very common in Turkey, I know that. So in the United States, this is becoming very, very limited practice. We are doing more and more no-till or reduced till. You can see the residue on the ground. This is corn residue, of course, as compared to the previous slide, which is distilled. This is no-till. So this can have tremendous impact on increasing soil microbiome, soil biological functions, reduce evaporation losses, and you can intercept the radiation that may reach to the soil surface with the residue. So less radiation into the soil surface means less soil temperature, less evaporation. So this is another cropping strategy, farming strategy that we utilize. These are some pictures that with my research team members in the field, doing things by ourselves, learning together. In Turkey, there is a lack of monitoring of evapotranspiration. There are a few places only, maybe 2 or 3 places in the whole country to measure evapotranspiration. We established a network in Nebraska, which is the largest evapotranspiration network in the United States, maybe in the world even. We use those flux towers to measure evapotranspiration on an hourly basis for a whole year, throughout the year. Some of those flux towers have been running for the last 15 years, every hour, nonstop, to quantify subsurface drip irrigated corn evapotranspiration. This is a center pivot irrigated grassland, rain-fed grassland. The point here is in Turkey there is a significant diversity, significant variability or variation in cropping systems. So we have to take time, invest energy, time, money, effort to be able to quantify evaporation losses from all those systems. There is no other way. If we are going to go into watershed scale that our minister was mentioning this morning, which is a great idea, watershed scale management, basin-wide management, this is great, but we have to know what is happening in that basin, right? We have to quantify precipitation, evapotranspiration, so that's why we have to invest time and energy to be able to do this kind of measurements on the ground. So rain-fed grassland, this is rain-fed winter wheat, this is irrigated winter wheat, and these are all my research programs or part of my research program. Subsurface drip irrigated winter wheat, which is the first subsurface drip irrigated winter wheat field in the United States. We have riparian vegetation because they utilize water too. We have to account for that. When you do basin-wide management, you have to account for everything pretty much. This is soybean. This is alfalfa. This is grain sorghum, irrigated popcorn. This is rain-fed switchgrass. So I invested multi-million dollars to be able to establish those flux tower network and maintain and keep them running over the years to be able to collect great quality data and then share them with the scientific community, but also state and federal agencies who are responsible setting the policies and management strategies for how do you best manage the water resources and agricultural inputs in a certain area. So I share all those data with different agencies. Vineyard, another flux tower. This is a cover crop. There are some areas in Turkey, or Turkey, I should say, that cover crops are implemented, but I think this can be looked at because there are significant benefits of cover crop. So I have a large USDA grant that is funding this research for long term. Different cover crops, black turtle bean. We do research on watermelon. We do research with sweet corn. What is this? Hops, yeah. So we do research on hops. Our flux tower run every hour nonstop, not only for the growing season, but dormant season, non-growing season, to be able to quantify how much evaporation losses occur from those time frames in the dormant season. So we keep going every hour nonstop, regardless it's minus 20 degrees, minus 30 degrees, doesn't really matter. We still have to be in the field. We spend a lot of time in the field at nighttime. In many days, we stay in the field from 7 a.m. until 7 today, until 7 a.m. tomorrow or next day, make measurements and quantify certain things every hour to be able to understand how plants function, how they respond to different climate variable changes at nighttime. There is and I understand there are colleagues, friends from Monsanto, from other companies, so drought-tolerant technology is another way to look at how do you counter the negative impacts of changing climate variables. I have a significant program on drought-tolerant maize. We quantify yield production functions, and so on for drought-tolerant corn in different areas. So this is another technology that we can utilize, and I'm coming with it close to the end. Another program that I established with a great team of colleagues and friends. So what? So as scientists, researchers, we do a ton of research, we do scientific discoveries, and then we publish papers and give presentations like this. So what? Well, at the end of the day, nothing we do actually matters if you don't take this knowledge, data, information, and transfer this to our citizens so that they can have the real impact on the ground. Let's be honest, we are not farmers, although I farmed many years with my father and grandfather. And you can see the pictures, I'm still kind of like a farmer, but researcher, scientist. So if you don't take this knowledge, data, information, and transfer to our farmers, crop consultants, data advisors, and state and federal agency personnel, then our scientific discoveries, research impact will not be complete. So this has to be taken to the user, to the public, right? So this program was established just for that. So we do research, and I'm gonna pass through those slides very fast to get to the pictures. We do research, and then we quantify certain technologies or identify certain technologies that can be implemented in farmers' fields to make better informed decisions. These are some of the soil moisture monitoring devices, crop water use measurement devices. We do research first. It has to be research-based. Everything we do, excuse me, everything we do has to be research-based. Everything has to be scientifically based. It cannot be based on opinion, based on personal, whatever. It has to be science and research and data-based. So all those technologies have been researched in my research programs. And then we take those to the farmers' fields. And these are different technologies. I don't want to spend too much time on those. We go to the farmers' fields and train them, educate them about certain technologies. What do they do, those technologies? How do you use them? How do you install them? How do you get the data? How do you interpret the data? How do you utilize that for management decisions? At the end of the day, professors, scientists, researchers' job, as far as I'm concerned, is to help public to make things better, to help them to increase their productivity, to help them to protect the environment, to help them to enhance their profit, of course, enhance their yield. Because all those good things, if you do that for the whole country, then the whole country's economy and well-being will be beneficial. So we go out to the fields. These are great friends, colleagues of mine in my research team. We teach our farmers, demonstrate certain technologies, one-on-one, if it's necessary, one farmer at a time. We have to take the time, effort to educate our people, our citizens, because they are the ones who are growing winter wheat. They are the ones who are growing corn and soybean and sorghum and other cropping systems. Spend a lot of time in the field, teaching, sharing our knowledge data on our website. We developed the first smartphone app that farmers can download to their cell phones and make them or use those technologies for their decision making. So right now there is about 1,500 farmers in our network. This is not just number of farmers. I know most of them by name. I traveled to each farmstead, each farmhouse, had conversation and did teaching. We represent about 1.6 million hectares of irrigated land. Those farmers, partners, colleagues, friends represent 1.6 million hectares. So that shows the impact or the magnitude of impact that we have in our research program. They reduce irrigation water application by about 50 to 60 millimeter per growing season based on using those technologies. So if they've been pumping 200 millimeter, then they pump 150 or 140 millimeter based on just those good technologies that they adopt, implement in their production fields, and of course coupled with our educational programs. Impact data. So it is the largest water management network, and we were acknowledged by USDA NIFA award, which was the first USDA NIFA award, which is very prestigious, that I personally accepted from Undersecretary of USDA and the NIFA Director, Sani Ramaswamy. Okay, so it is critical to educate. We are scientists, researchers, but education has to be a big portion of our portfolio. So we travel extensively to different places and give presentations in the field, in the classroom, and continuously educate our citizens on different topics: climate change, irrigation, crop physiology, soil physics, and their interactions. Just final message. I think I have only one or two more slides left. So collaboration is critical. Changing climate variables are having significant impacts on many different levels, and that has to be quantified. Those changes have to be quantified to be able to produce or develop locally specific programs and strategies to be able to deal with those changes. And also share the data, information, knowledge with our leaders, policymakers, decision makers, so that they can make better decisions for the citizens. The researchers, scientists, educators must be the source for unbiased data by our policymakers. So, as an example, I was very fortunate to be invited to U.S. Congress, to U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, and I gave a presentation for 1 hour at the U.S. House of Representatives and 1 hour at the U.S. Senate about those issues. You know, what is the trend in the United States? What kind of educational research, extension programs that we need? So I talked to the congressmen, senators from many different states, from all states essentially. So it was a very humbling experience. It was one of the best days of my life. But to be able to be there as a scientist, researcher, and give this kind of information and share data, knowledge, and projections for the future with our decision makers, policy makers, this is the model that we should look for, I think. So with that, I'm going to end, and I apologize if I exceeded my time. I think I did, but I apologize for that. So thank you so much.